Colorado Territory, 1872. The crimson sunset painted the rugged mountains with fire as Zachariah Ingram guided his horse through the narrow pass. At 25, Zach had already spent 7 years drifting across the frontier, moving whenever the walls of civilization pressed too close. His lean, muscular frame and sun-kissed skin spoke of endless days in the saddle, while his clear blue eyes held the wariness of a man who'd learned to trust the reliability of his Colt revolver over the promises of people. The town of Silver Creek emerged from the shadow of the mountains, a collection of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of wilderness. Zach adjusted his well-worn Stetson, a hint of golden-brown hair visible beneath its brim. His clean-shaven face, unusual for most cowboys, gave him a youthful appearance that often led others to underestimate him, a mistake few made twice. "One night," he murmured to his Palomino gelding, Storm. "We get supplies, maybe a hot meal, then back to open country tomorrow." The horse snorted in response, seeming to understand. Zach patted Storm's neck, finding more comfort in the animal's companionship than he ever had with people. 7 years ago, he'd watched his father die slowly from a gunshot wound after trusting a business partner who turned out to be a swindler. The lesson had carved itself deep. Attachment was a luxury the frontier didn't permit. The only safe path was relying on himself. Silver Creek's main street was busier than Zach had expected, with miners, cowboys, and townspeople crowding the boardwalks. A newly constructed railroad station at the far end explained the bustle, civilization creeping ever westward. Something in Zach's chest tightened at the sight. Each year, the places where a man could truly breathe freely grew fewer. He dismounted outside the general store, his boots raising small puffs of dust from the street. The familiar weight of his revolver against his hip provided its usual comfort as he secured Storm to the hitching post. "Beautiful animal," came a voice that stopped Zach in his tracks. He turned to find a young woman standing nearby, her emerald-green eyes studying his horse with genuine appreciation. She wore a simple but well-made burgundy dress, practical for frontier life yet flattering to her slender figure. Her chestnut brown hair was swept up in a practical style, though a few wayward strands had escaped to frame her face. Despite the practical frontier clothing, something about her bearing suggested Eastern refinement. "Thank you, ma'am," Zach replied, tipping his hat politely while maintaining his distance. "Storm's been a good companion." "Horses often make better company than people," she said with a slight smile that revealed a dimple in her right cheek. "Especially in places like Silver Creek." The observation, matching his own thoughts so closely, caught Zach off guard. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "Perhaps I am," she extended her hand. "Olivia Zimmerman. Most folks call me Liv." Zachariah Ingram, Zach to most. Her handshake was firm, her skin surprisingly calloused for someone with such delicate features. Zach guessed her to be about 23, though something in those green eyes seemed older. "New to Silver Creek?" she asked. "Just passing through, heading back out tomorrow." A flash of something, disappointment, crossed her face before she composed herself. "Then you'll want to know the best place for a hot meal. The Silver Creek Hotel serves decent food, unlike the saloon which is likely to poison you slowly." Zach found himself smiling despite his usual reserve. "I appreciate the warning. It's the least I can do for a traveler." She glanced down the street, her expression suddenly changing. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Ingram, perhaps our paths will cross again before you leave town." Before he could respond, Olivia was moving away, her pace quickening as she disappeared around the corner of the mercantile. Zach watched her go, puzzled by the abrupt departure. Turning to see what might have caused it, he noticed only the usual frontier town tableau. A pair of miners arguing outside the assay office, a wagon unloading supplies, and the town marshal conversing with a well-dressed man outside the bank. Pushing the encounter from his mind, Zach focused on his errands. He needed supplies, information about the trails heading north, and that hot meal Olivia had mentioned. The woman's face lingered in his thoughts longer than he cared to admit, but Zach reminded himself of his own rule: no attachments. By this time tomorrow, Silver Creek would be nothing but dust at his back. Night had fallen by the time Zach finished his business at the general store and livery. Storm was comfortably stabled, and his saddlebags were packed with enough provisions for the next leg of his journey. All that remained was finding that meal and a place to sleep for the night. The Silver Creek Hotel stood 3 stories tall, surprisingly grand for a frontier town. Its painted facade and glass windows suggested prosperity, likely from the silver mine that had given the town its name. Inside, a modest restaurant occupied the ground floor, the smell of roasting beef and fresh bread making Zach's stomach rumble in anticipation. He selected a corner table with his back to the wall, a habit formed from years on the trail. As he scanned the room, his gaze snagged on a familiar figure. Olivia Zimmerman sat alone at a table near the window, her attention focused on a leather-bound book. In the warm lamplight, her chestnut hair gleamed with hints of gold. She had changed into a deep blue dress that accentuated the cream of her skin. As if sensing his attention, she looked up. Recognition flickered across her features, followed by a warm smile that Zach felt like a physical force. She closed her book and, to his surprise, gathered her things and approached his table. "Mr. Ingram, would you mind some company for dinner? I find eating alone invites unwanted attention in establishments like this." The request caught him off guard. His instinct was to decline, maintaining distance was safer, but something in her direct gaze challenged him. "Please join me," he found himself saying, rising slightly as she took the seat across from him. "Thank you," she placed her book on the table. "I hope your business in town was productive." "Productive enough, supplies purchased, horse rested, all set for tomorrow's departure." "North, you mentioned." Zach nodded, studying her with newfound curiosity. "Montana Territory. Heard there's good land available for those willing to work it." "And are you willing to work it, I mean, or is Montana just another stop before moving on again?" Her directness was startling. Most people avoided such personal questions with strangers, especially on the frontier where many had pasts they preferred not to discuss. "What makes you think I'm just passing through?" Zach asked, suddenly wary. Olivia's smile was gentle, but her eyes reflected understanding. "I recognize the look, the restlessness, I've seen it many times." She paused as the waitress approached their table. They ordered their meals, roast beef for Zach and chicken pie for Olivia, before resuming their conversation. "You're observant," Zach conceded, "a necessary skill for a widow in a mining town." The revelation surprised him. "You're a widow." "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Thank you, it's been 3 years now." Her fingers twisted the simple gold band she wore. "Long enough that most people have stopped treating me like I might shatter, but not so long that the gossips have stopped wondering when I'll remarry." "And will you?" The question escaped before Zach could stop himself. "Remarry?" Olivia's expression grew distant. "Once was enough, I think." The waitress returned with their meals, interrupting what had become an unexpectedly personal conversation. As they ate, the discussion turned to safer topics: the changing weather, the growth of the town since the railroad's arrival, and the quality of the food. "So you've been in Silver Creek for some time?" Zach asked as they finished their meal. 3 years, since shortly after James, my husband, died." She hesitated, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. "I own the bookshop at the end of Main Street. It's small, but it provides a living." "A bookshop?" Zach raised an eyebrow. "Unusual business for a frontier town." "Perhaps. But even miners and cowboys get tired of cards and whiskey eventually. Some even remember they enjoyed reading once." Her smile returned, transforming her face from merely pretty to truly beautiful. "And what about you, Mr. Ingram? What keeps you moving from place to place instead of setting down roots?" The direct question should have raised his defenses, but something about Olivia's manner, lacking judgment or expectation, made Zach consider his answer honestly. "The frontier's changing," he finally said. "Getting smaller every year. Railroads, telegraph lines, towns springing up where there was nothing but open country. I suppose I'm trying to stay ahead of it all." "Ahead of progress. Or people." The insight struck too close to home. Zach shifted uncomfortably. "Both maybe. The way I see it, the frontier's no place for permanent attachments. Everything out here is temporary. Towns boom and bust, weather destroys what man builds, and people." He paused. "People aren't always what they seem." Olivia studied him with those penetrating green eyes. "That's a lonely philosophy, Mr. Ingram." "But a safe one." "Is it, I wonder?" She glanced toward the hotel's entrance, her expression changing suddenly. "I should be going, it's getting late." Zach followed her gaze but saw only a group of miners entering the restaurant. "I'll walk you home," he offered, surprising himself. Olivia hesitated. "That's not necessary." "I insist. It's dark and I've walked these streets alone for 3 years," she finished with a gentle firmness. "But thank you for the offer and for the company at dinner." Zach watched, puzzled, as she gathered her belongings. Something about her sudden desire to leave struck him as odd. Have I offended you, Mrs. Zimmerman? Not at all, I simply remembered an appointment. She stood, clutching her book against her chest. Perhaps you might stop by my shop before you leave town tomorrow. I have some maps of the Northern Territories that might be useful. Before he could respond, the hotel door burst open again, admitting a gust of cold night air and a tall man in an expensive coat. The newcomer's eyes scanned the room with purpose before landing on Olivia. His face hardened into a scowl. Mrs. Zimmerman, he called, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. Still out past respectable hours, I see. The room quieted as heads turned toward them. Olivia's posture stiffened, but her voice remained calm. Good evening, Mr. Crawford. I was just leaving. Zach didn't miss the way her knuckles whitened around her book or the slight tremor in her voice. Standing, he positioned himself slightly between Olivia and the approaching man. Is there a problem here? He asked quietly. Crawford's cold eyes assessed Zach, taking in the worn trail clothes and the revolver at his hip. No problem, Mrs. Zimmerman and I are well acquainted. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Aren't we, Olivia? As you say, Mr. Crawford. She turned to Zach, her voice low. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Ingram. Good night. With that, she moved toward the door, her spine straight as a ramrod. Crawford watched her go, then shifted his attention back to Zach, passing through. He asked, his tone deceptively casual. That's right. Best keep moving then. Silver Creek isn't kind to drifters who stick around too long. With a final assessing look, Crawford turned and followed Olivia out into the night. Zach settled his bill quickly and stepped onto the hotel's porch. The night air carried the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains, along with the usual frontier town smells of horses, wood smoke, and dust. He caught a glimpse of Olivia's blue dress as she turned the corner at the end of the street, Crawford several paces behind her. Every instinct told Zach to follow, to ensure her safety, but he reminded himself of his own rule. No entanglements. Whatever history existed between Olivia Zimmerman and Crawford was none of his business. By this time tomorrow, he would be miles away, leaving Silver Creek and its secrets behind. And yet, as he climbed the stairs to his rented room, Zachariah Ingram couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just entered his carefully ordered life. Something that challenged the very foundation of the beliefs he'd built his existence upon. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams filled with emerald eyes and unspoken warnings. Morning brought clear skies and a crisp autumn chill. Zach rose with the sun, his belongings already packed and ready for the trail. His plan was simple. Collect Storm from the livery, purchase a final few supplies, and be on his way north before the town fully awakened. Yet as he stepped onto the hotel porch, his gaze drifted down the street toward where Olivia had said her bookshop stood. The memory of her face when Crawford had appeared nagged at him. There had been fear there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Not your concern, he muttered to himself, turning resolutely toward the livery. He had just reached the stable when a commotion from the direction of the sheriff's office caught his attention. A small crowd had gathered, voices raised in excitement and alarm. Against his better judgment, Zach changed direction, curiosity drawing him toward the disturbance. Broke in sometime after midnight, he heard someone say as he approached. Sheriff's organizing a search party now. What was stolen? Zach asked a grizzled miner standing at the edge of the crowd. Not what who, the man replied. Someone kidnapped the widow Zimmerman right from her own home. Ransacked the place too, from what I hear. The news hit Zach like a physical blow. The sheriff know who did it. The miner shrugged, no witnesses. But that Crawford fellow from the mining company is acting mighty concerned for someone who's been trying to run her out of town for years. Zach's eyes narrowed as he spotted Crawford himself standing on the sheriff's porch, gesticulating as he spoke with the town's lawman. Something about the man's performance rang false. Without conscious decision, Zach found himself pushing through the crowd toward the sheriff's office. The lawman, a weathered individual with a salt and pepper mustache, was addressing the gathered townspeople. We'll have search parties heading out within the hour, the sheriff was saying. Mr. Crawford has generously offered a reward of $50 for information leading to Mrs. Zimmerman's safe return. What about her bookshop? Zach called out. Was anything taken besides Mrs. Zimmerman herself? All eyes turned to him, including Crawford's coldly calculating gaze. And you are? The sheriff asked. Zachariah Ingram, just passing through, but I had dinner with Mrs. Zimmerman last night at the hotel. Crawford stepped forward. This is the drifter I mentioned, Sheriff, the one who was with Olivia just before she disappeared. The implication was clear in his tone, and Zach felt the crowd's mood shift subtly against him. I walked her to the door and that was it, Zach stated firmly. Last I saw Mr. Crawford here was following her down the street. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Is that so? Mr. Crawford told me he escorted Mrs. Zimmerman to her shop and then left her there safely around 9 o'clock. That's a lie, Zach said flatly. He followed her out of the hotel looking none too friendly. Crawford's face flushed with anger. How dare you? I've known Olivia for years. I'm the one who's been looking out for her welfare since her husband's tragic accident. Something in the way Crawford emphasized accident caught Zach's attention. There was history here, deep currents running beneath the surface that he couldn't begin to understand. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Olivia Zimmerman was in danger, and Crawford was somehow involved. Sheriff, Zach said, did you check Mrs. Zimmerman's bookshop thoroughly? She mentioned having maps that might be valuable. The sheriff exchanged a look with Crawford. The place was torn apart, but I couldn't say what might be missing without knowing what was there to begin with. I'd like to see it, Zach stated. Now hold on, Crawford interrupted. We don't know anything about this man. For all we know, he could be responsible for Olivia's disappearance. The sheriff studied Zach carefully. You said you're passing through. When did you arrive in Silver Creek? Yesterday afternoon. I was planning to leave this morning. Convenient timing, Crawford muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The sheriff seemed to consider for a moment before making a decision. Mr. Ingram, I'd appreciate it if you delay your departure until we get this matter sorted. In the meantime, I don't see any harm in you having a look at Mrs. Zimmerman's shop. You might notice something we missed, given your conversation with her last night. Crawford began to protest, but the sheriff silenced him with a raised hand. I'll accompany Mr. Ingram myself. The rest of you form up into search parties. We'll start with the roads leading out of town and the abandoned mining claims to the west. As the crowd dispersed, the sheriff gestured for Zach to follow him down the street. Name's Samuel Porter, he said as they walked. Been sheriff here since Silver Creek was nothing but a tent city and a handful of prospectors. You know Mrs. Zimmerman well? Zach asked. Porter nodded. Good woman, came here after her husband died in a mining accident over in Leadville. Opened that bookshop with what little money she had left and has been a respected member of the community since. And Crawford. The sheriff's expression darkened. Jeremiah Crawford represents Eastern mining interests. Showed up about 2 years ago claiming the silver vein runs right under the eastern part of town, including the land Mrs. Zimmerman's shop sits on. Let me guess he's been trying to buy her out. Started with offers, moved on to pressure when she refused to sell, Porter sighed. I've had to warn him off more than once, but he's careful to stay just on the right side of the law. They reached the bookshop, a modest storefront with Zimmerman books and maps painted on the window. The glass in the door had been shattered and the interior was visible through the opening. Stepping carefully through the broken door, Zach surveyed the destruction. Bookshelves had been overturned, their contents scattered across the floor. The small counter where transactions would have taken place had been smashed, and a strongbox lay open and empty nearby. Robbery, Zach suggested, though he was already doubting that simple explanation. Porter shook his head. Olivia never kept more than a few dollars in that box. Everyone in town knew that. Zach moved deeper into the shop, his boots crunching on broken glass and splintered wood. Something about the destruction seemed methodical rather than random, as if someone had been searching for something specific. She mentioned having maps of the Northern Territories, Zach said, remembering their conversation at dinner. Where would those have been kept? Porter pointed to an area behind the counter where a large flat drawer cabinet lay on its side, its contents strewn about. Map case. James Zimmerman was a surveyor before the accident. Olivia kept his maps as part of her inventory. Kneeling beside the scattered maps, Zach began to sort through them. Most were standard territorial maps showing settlements, trails, and geographical features. Nothing that seemed worth kidnapping someone over. What exactly happened to her husband? Zach asked as he continued his search. Porter hesitated. Official report said a cave-in at one of the Leadville mines. James was inspecting a new silver claim for some Eastern investors when it happened. Eastern investors like Crawford's employers. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. That connection never occurred to me until now, but yes, could be the same outfit. Zach's fingers paused over a map that seemed different from the others, newer, with handwritten notations in the margins. It showed a section of land north of Silver Creek, with what appeared to be survey markers indicating a mineral deposit. "Sheriff, look at this," he held up the map. "This isn't a published map. It looks like survey notes." Porter took the map, studying it with growing interest. "These are James Zimmerman's markings, all right, I recognize his handwriting." He pointed to a notation in the corner. "This date, it's just 2 weeks before he died." The pieces began falling into place in Zach's mind. What if James Zimmerman found something during that survey, something valuable enough that someone wanted to keep it quiet? And what if Olivia knew about it? Porter continued the thought. Or had evidence of it? Zach looked around the ransacked shop with new understanding. They weren't just looking for Olivia. They were looking for this map, or whatever information it leads to. The sheriff carefully folded the map and tucked it inside his vest. "We need to figure out where this location is. And fast, because if Crawford is behind this." "Olivia's life is in danger," Zach finished grimly. "How many men does Crawford have working for him?" "Half a dozen regular mining company men, plus whatever hired guns he might have brought in recently." Zach's decision was made before he even consciously considered it. The lone wolf philosophy that had guided him for 7 years seemed suddenly hollow in the face of Olivia Zimmerman's peril. "I'm good with a horse and no tracking," he said. "Let me help find her." Porter studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Get your horse and meet me back at my office in 20 minutes. I'll have someone who knows this territory better than anyone guide us to where this map leads." As Zach hurried toward the livery, his mind raced with possibilities and questions. Why had Olivia recognized something in him last night? What secrets had she been carrying all this time? And most puzzlingly, why did he care so much about a woman he'd barely met? The answer came unbidden. Because in her eyes he'd seen a reflection of his own carefully guarded solitude, and for the first time in years, that solitude had felt like a prison rather than protection. 30 minutes later, Zach rode beside Sheriff Porter and an elderly former prospector named Caleb Wilson, who had sworn he could identify the location on James Zimmerman's map. They had left Silver Creek behind, following a narrow trail that wound into the foothills north of town. James was a meticulous surveyor, Wilson explained as they rode. "If he marked a silver deposit here, you can bet your last dollar it's there. And a rich one too, judging by his notations." "Rich enough to kill for?" Zach asked. The old prospector spat to the side. "Men have killed for color not worth a day's wages. A virgin silver vein like what James described, that's an empire for whoever controls it." "And Crawford wants an empire," Porter added grimly. They rode in silence for a time, the trail growing steeper and more difficult. Around midday, Wilson pointed to a ridge ahead. "That's it. The survey markers would have been placed just beyond that rise in the valley on the other side." Zach studied the terrain with a practiced eye. "If they're holding misses. Zimmerman up there, they'll have lookouts posted." Porter nodded. "We'll leave the horses here and approach on foot. Element of surprise may be our only advantage." Securing their mounts in a small copse of trees, the 3 men began the slow process of climbing toward the ridge. Zach moved with the quiet caution he'd developed during years of hunting and avoiding being hunted on the frontier. Every sense was alert for danger as they neared the top of the rise. Dropping to a crouch, Zach crawled the final few yards to peer over the ridge. Below, a small valley opened up, bisected by a stream. Near the water stood a crude cabin, likely an abandoned prospector's shelter, with smoke rising from its chimney. 2 horses were tethered nearby, and a man with a rifle sat on a stump outside the door. "One guard that I can see," Zach reported in a whisper as Porter and Wilson joined him. "Cabin by the stream." 2 horses. "There'll be more inside," Porter predicted. "Crawford wouldn't come alone." "How do you want to play this, Sheriff?" Porter considered for a moment. "Wilson, circle around to the east side of the valley. If shooting starts, create a distraction from that direction. Ingram, you approach from the west. I'll confront them directly, official-like. Might be they'll stand down when faced with the law." "And if they don't?" Zach asked. The sheriff checked his revolver. "Then we do what needs doing to save Mrs. Zimmerman." They separated, each taking their assigned route. Zach moved silently through the underbrush, working his way down the slope and around to approach the cabin from the blind side. As he drew nearer, he could hear voices from inside, one of them unmistakably Crawford's. "Be reasonable, Olivia," Crawford was saying, his tone a poor imitation of patience. "Just tell me where the original survey notes are, and this can all be over. You can go back to town, keep your bookshop, live your life." A woman's voice responded, Olivia's, though strained with what might have been pain or fear. "We both know that's a lie, Jeremiah. You killed James when he refused to falsify his report. You'll kill me too, once you have what you want." The accusation sent a chill through Zach. He edged closer, positioning himself near a window where he could see inside while remaining hidden. Through the dirty glass, he could make out 3 figures. Crawford stood near a table, while another man, rough-looking with a scar across his cheek, leaned against the far wall. Olivia sat tied to a chair, her dress torn and dirty, a bruise darkening one cheek. Despite her situation, her posture remained defiant. "Your husband's death was unfortunate but necessary," Crawford replied coldly. "He was going to expose our operation to the Mining Commission, reveal that we'd been salting claims and selling worthless stock. But this," he tapped what looked like a copy of the map they'd found, "this changes everything. A legitimate silver deposit, richer than anything in Leadville. With this, we don't need to run confidence games anymore." "And all it cost was my husband's life," Olivia said bitterly. Crawford shrugged. "Business has casualties, my dear. Now for the last time, where are James's original survey notes and samples, the ones that prove the assay results?" "I told you I don't know. James must have hidden them before he died." The scarred man pushed away from the wall. "She's lying, boss. Let me persuade her proper." Crawford hesitated, then nodded. "Nothing permanent yet, Ryder. We still need her cooperation." As Ryder moved toward Olivia, the sound of Sheriff Porter's voice rang out from outside the cabin. "Crawford, this is Sheriff Porter. Come out with your hands up. We know you have Mrs. Zimmerman in there." The sudden interruption froze everyone inside the cabin. Crawford cursed, then gestured to Ryder. "Take care of the sheriff. I'll get what we need from Mrs. Zimmerman." As Ryder grabbed his rifle and headed for the door, Zach knew it was time to act. He drew his revolver and in one swift motion, broke the window glass with the butt of the weapon and leveled it at Crawford. "Don't move," he commanded. Crawford's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed with rage. I knew you were trouble the moment you rode into town." Outside, the sound of gunfire erupted as Ryder exchanged shots with the sheriff. Crawford used the distraction to lunge for a pistol on the table. Zach fired, the bullet striking Crawford's arm. The mining company man howled in pain but managed to grab the weapon with his other hand. Zach dove through the window as Crawford's shot splintered the wooden frame where his head had been a moment before. Rolling to his feet inside the cabin, Zach kicked the table over for cover just as Crawford fired again. "Zach," Olivia cried out, struggling against her bonds. "Stay down," he shouted, returning fire and forcing Crawford to retreat toward the back of the cabin. Outside, the gunfire intensified. Zach could hear Porter calling for Wilson, suggesting the old prospector had joined the fight. Inside, he was in a standoff with Crawford, neither able to get a clear shot at the other. "You're a fool, Ingram," Crawford called from his position behind an overturned bookcase. "This claim is worth a fortune. I could make you rich beyond your wildest dreams." "Not interested in blood money," Zach replied, inching toward Olivia while keeping his revolver trained in Crawford's direction. "Everyone has a price." "Not everyone." Reaching Olivia, Zach began working at her bonds while maintaining his guard. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious," she whispered, "but Zach, there's another man." The warning came too late. A third figure emerged from a back room, revolver already drawn. Zach spun, firing instinctively. The man staggered but got off a shot of his own before collapsing. White-hot pain seared across Zach's side as the bullet grazed him. Crawford used the moment to break from cover, aiming directly at Zach's head. Time seemed to slow as Zach realized he couldn't bring his weapon to bear quickly enough. The shot that rang out came not from Crawford's pistol, but from the doorway. Sheriff Porter stood there, his smoking revolver still aimed at Crawford, who now crumpled to the floor with a spreading red stain on his chest. "Sheriff," Zach acknowledged, grimacing as he pressed a hand to his bleeding side. Porter nodded, moving quickly to check that Crawford and the other gunmen were no longer threats. "Wilson's keeping an eye on Ryder outside. He's wounded but alive." He holstered his weapon and helped Zach finish freeing Olivia. The moment her hands were unbound, she reached for Zach, her fingers gently probing his injury. "You're bleeding." "Just a graze," he assured her, though the pain suggested otherwise. Her green eyes searched his face, filled with concern and something deeper that made Zach's heart stutter. "You came for me." "Why?" The question hung between them, demanding an answer that challenged everything Zach had believed about himself and his place in the world. Before he could form a response, Porter interrupted. "We should get you both back to town. Doctor needs to look at that wound, and Mrs. Zimmerman needs to give a formal statement about Crawford's confession." Olivia nodded but didn't take her eyes from Zach's face. "Yes, of course, there's much to explain." The ride back to Silver Creek was slow and painful for Zach, whose side throbbed with every movement of his horse. Olivia insisted on riding double with him despite Porter's offer of his own mount, claiming Zach might need support if he weakened from blood loss. The truth, which neither acknowledged aloud, was that neither wanted to be separated from the other. "Crawford killed James," Olivia said quietly as they rode, her voice meant only for Zach's ears. "I've suspected it for 3 years but could never prove it. James wrote to me before he died saying he discovered something important and dangerous. He hid the original survey notes and samples somewhere safe, but before he could tell me where, there was the accident at the mine. And Crawford's been after you ever since, thinking you knew where they were hidden." She nodded against his shoulder. "At first he tried to court me, thinking he could charm the information out of me. When that failed, he tried intimidation. The map you found was my only tangible evidence, and I kept it hidden among the regular inventory." "Why didn't you leave? Go somewhere Crawford couldn't find you." Olivia was silent for a long moment. "Because running would mean James died for nothing. I stayed to find justice for him. And because I hoped someday I'd discover what he hid." The simple courage of her stance humbled Zach. While he had spent years running from attachment and responsibility, she had stood her ground against a powerful enemy, alone and armed with nothing but determination. "You're braver than most men I've known," he said softly. Her arms tightened slightly around his waist, careful to avoid his wound. "Not brave, just stubborn, my mother would say." There was a smile in her voice. "Besides, where would I go? The bookshop was all I had left." The words struck Zach with unexpected force. The bookshop was all she had left. He had stormed his gear and the open country, and suddenly none of it seemed like enough. By the time they reached Silver Creek, word of Crawford's crimes and capture had preceded them. A crowd gathered in the street as Porter led their small procession to the doctor's office, rider bound and slumped over Wilson's spare horse. Dr. Maxwell attended to Zach's wound, while Porter took Olivia's statement in the next room. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, though it had taken a chunk of flesh that would leave a scar. "You're lucky," the doctor commented as he bandaged the injury. "An inch to the right and we'd be having a very different conversation." Zach nodded, his thoughts not on his narrow escape, but on the woman whose voice he could hear through the thin wall, steadily recounting 3 years of suspicion and fear culminating in her kidnapping. When the doctor finished, Zach found himself alone in the small examination room. Through the window, he could see the main street of Silver Creek bustling with activity as news of Crawford's crimes spread. In a few days, representatives from the territorial government would arrive to investigate the mining company's operations. Crawford, if he survived his wound, would face charges of murder, kidnapping, and fraud. And Zach would be facing a choice. The door opened and Olivia stepped inside. She had washed and changed into fresh clothes someone had brought from her home, though the bruise on her cheek stood out starkly against her pale skin. "The sheriff says I should thank you for saving my life," she said, moving to stand beside the examination table where he sat. "But that seems inadequate for what you did." Zach shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what needed doing." Most men would have ridden on and left Silver Creek's problems behind them. Her eyes studied him with that same penetrating look from the night before. "Yet you stayed. Why?" It was the same question she had asked in the cabin, and this time Zach couldn't avoid answering. "Because when I looked at you last night, I saw something I recognized, something I've been running from for years." "What was that?" "Loneliness. The kind that comes from keeping everyone at a distance." He met her gaze directly. "I told myself it was safer that way, that the frontier is no place for attachments. But watching you stand your ground against Crawford, not running even when it might have been easier, made me wonder if I've been wrong all along." Olivia's expression softened. "The frontier is harsh, Zach. But facing it alone makes it harsher still. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. James and I came west because we believed we could build something together that we couldn't apart. Even after losing him, I never regretted that choice. The warmth of her hand in his seemed to spread through Zach's body, chasing away a coldness he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. I was planning to leave for Montana tomorrow, he said, watching her face carefully. I know. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his. What if I didn't? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Olivia's green eyes widened slightly, a cautious hope appearing in their depths. Silver Creek could use a man of your caliber, she said carefully. The sheriff mentioned he's been looking for a deputy. Zach smiled, recognizing her attempt to give him a practical reason to stay. Is that the only reason I should consider it? A blush colored her cheeks. No. But it might be the most respectable one to mention after knowing each other only 2 days. He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his injured side. Fair enough. But I'd like to hear the other reasons sometime. Stay and perhaps you will. Her smile held a promise that made his heart race. Besides, there's still the matter of James's hidden survey notes. I could use help finding them, someone I can trust. Is that what I am, someone you trust? The question was serious despite his light tone. Olivia considered him for a long moment. Yes, she finally said, though I can't fully explain why. Perhaps because when I looked into your eyes last night, I saw the same recognition you described. A reflection of my own guarded solitude, and for the first time in 3 years, I found myself wanting to lower those guards. The admission, so honest and vulnerable, struck Zach to his core. He had spent 7 years convincing himself that the frontier offered no space for such openness, that survival depended on self-reliance and emotional distance. Yet here was Olivia Zimmerman, who had endured loss and danger without surrendering her capacity for trust or connection. I'll stay, he said, the decision feeling both momentous and utterly natural. At least until we find those survey notes and make sure Crawford and his associates answer for what they've done. Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. A practical reason I approve. For now, he agreed, returning her smile, the rest we can discover together. As autumn gave way to winter, Zach settled into life in Silver Creek with a sense of peace he had not known since before his father's death. Sheriff Porter had indeed offered him the position of deputy, which provided both a steady income and a purpose that suited his abilities. The townsfolk, initially wary of the drifter who had suddenly decided to put down roots, gradually accepted him as one of their own. Most evenings found him at Zimmerman Books and Maps, helping Olivia restore order to the shop after Crawford's men had ransacked it. As they worked side by side, shelving books and repairing damaged furniture, they shared stories of their pasts and tentative hopes for the future. The easy companionship that had sparked between them that first night deepened with each passing day. I never thought I'd enjoy staying in one place this long, Zach admitted one evening as they closed the shop. Snow was falling gently outside, transforming Silver Creek into a scene from a Christmas card. Olivia glanced up from the ledger she was updating, her green eyes twinkling in the lamplight. 6 weeks is hardly a lifetime commitment, Deputy Ingram. Longest I've stayed anywhere since leaving home, he countered, moving to stand beside her at the counter. Strange how quickly it started to feel natural. The town or the company? She asked with a raised eyebrow. Zach's smile was answer enough. Reaching out, he brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. The bruise from her ordeal had faded, but sometimes he still saw the shadow of fear in her eyes when the bell above the door rang unexpectedly or when unfamiliar riders passed through town. Crawford had survived his wound only to face trial in Denver for murder, kidnapping, and fraud. His mining company had collapsed when investigators discovered the extent of their criminal activities. The danger had passed, but its memory remained. Have you given any more thought to where James might have hidden those survey notes? Zach asked, changing the subject before the moment between them could deepen further. They had established an unspoken boundary, a cautious exploration of feelings neither was quite ready to name. Olivia sighed, accepting the shift in conversation. I've gone through his letters 100 times looking for clues. The last one mentioned a place where our future began as being the safest hiding spot. But that could mean anything, where we met, where he proposed, where we first discussed coming west. Or something more literal, Zach suggested. The land claim itself could be considered the beginning of your future here. Her eyes widened. Zach, that's brilliant. The original claim stake, James would have marked it with a cairn of stones. What if he hid the notes and samples there? It would be a logical place, secure, unlikely to be disturbed, and clearly marked on his survey map. Zach tapped the copy of the map they had recovered from Crawford. We could ride out there tomorrow and check. The weather's supposed to clear by morning. Olivia's enthusiasm faltered. In December, the higher elevations will be snowbound. I've traveled through worse. Besides, we won't need to go all the way to the silver deposit, just to the original claim marker near the trail. He grinned at her. Unless you're afraid of a little snow, Mrs. Zimmerman. Her eyes narrowed at the challenge. I've lived in Colorado for 5 years, Deputy. I've seen more snow than you have tumbleweeds. Then it's settled, we leave at first light. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the world transformed by several inches of fresh snow. Zach had arranged for both their absences, his from the sheriff's office and hers from the bookshop, and prepared Storm and a gentle mare named Daisy for the journey. They rode out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The trail leading into the foothills was familiar now to Zach, though the snow gave it a different character than during their desperate ride to rescue Olivia. It's beautiful, she said as they paused to rest the horses near midday. The valley below was a patchwork of white and dark green, Silver Creek itself a tiny cluster of buildings in the distance. Zach watched her instead of the view, struck by how the cold had brought color to her cheeks and how the winter sunlight turned her chestnut hair to burnished gold where it escaped from beneath her hat. Yes, it is, he agreed softly. She caught his gaze and blushed, understanding his meaning. We should keep moving if we want to reach the claim site and make it back before dark. They continued climbing, the trail growing steeper and the snow deeper as they ascended. By early afternoon, they reached the ridge overlooking the small valley where Crawford had held Olivia captive. The cabin stood empty now, its door swinging in the winter wind. The claim marker should be about half a mile east of the cabin, Olivia said, consulting the map, near that stand of pines on the ridge. They left their horses ground-tied in a sheltered spot and proceeded on foot, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The climb was arduous, and Zach kept a watchful eye on Olivia, ready to offer assistance if needed. But she moved with the sure-footed determination that had first drawn him to her, refusing to be daunted by the difficult terrain. The claim marker, when they found it, was a simple cairn of stones topped with a wooden stake. Wind and weather had eroded the writing on the stake, but enough remained to confirm it was James Zimmerman's original claim. This is it, Olivia whispered, her voice tight with emotion. She knelt beside the cairn, brushing snow from the stones. If James hid anything here, it would be beneath these rocks. Together they began carefully dismantling the cairn, setting each stone aside where it could be replaced later. The work was slow, their fingers growing numb despite their gloves. As they neared the bottom of the pile, Zach spotted something, a small metal box wedged between two flat stones at the base of the cairn. Olivia, he said, pointing to the box. Look. Her breath caught as she saw it. With trembling hands, she worked the box free from its hiding place. It was a simple tin container, the kind used to hold tobacco or small tools, sealed with wax around the edges to protect it from moisture. This has to be it, she said, her voice barely audible above the mountain wind. She looked at Zach, uncertainty in her eyes. After 3 years of wondering, I'm almost afraid to open it. Zach placed his hand over hers. Whatever's inside, we face it together. With a nod, Olivia broke the wax seal and carefully opened the box. Inside lay several folded papers and a small cloth pouch. She removed the papers first, unfolding them with reverent care. These are James's original survey notes, she confirmed, scanning the pages. And here, she indicated a detailed section of calculations and descriptions, proof of the silver deposit exactly where he marked it on the map. Plus a signed and witnessed statement about Crawford's earlier fraudulent activities. Your husband was thorough, Zach observed, impressed by the meticulous documentation. He knew Crawford was dangerous. Olivia reached for the cloth pouch, loosening its drawstring to reveal several chunks of ore, and these must be the samples he took from the site. Zach examined one of the samples, whistling softly at the visible threads of silver running through the rock. This is as rich a deposit as I've ever seen. No wonder Crawford was willing to kill for it. And now it belongs to me. Olivia looked up at the snow-covered mountains surrounding them, her expression contemplative. James's legacy. The future he wanted for us. What will you do with it? She considered for a moment before carefully returning the samples and documents to the box. File the claim properly, develop it honestly the way James would have wanted. Use the proceeds to expand the bookshop, maybe establish a proper school for Silver Creek. She smiled at him. And I'll need someone I trust to help manage it all. The implication wasn't lost on Zach. Someone like a deputy sheriff with no mining experience. Someone like a man who risked his life for a woman he barely knew. A man who chose to stay when every instinct told him to run. Her green eyes held his, vulnerable yet certain. If he wanted the job, that is. The wind gusted around them, pulling at their coats and stinging their faces with tiny ice crystals. Yet Zach felt only warmth as he looked at Olivia Zimmerman, the widow with secrets who had irrevocably changed his life in the span of 2 days. What if he wanted more than just a job, he asked, the question carrying all the feelings he had carefully held in check over the past 6 weeks. Olivia's breath visibly caught, forming a small cloud between them. Then he should know that the widow might be ready to set aside her grief and embrace a new beginning. If he were to ask. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then, with deliberate care, Zach leaned forward and kissed her. Her lips were cold from the mountain air but warmed quickly against his. When they parted, both were breathless in a way that had nothing to do with the high altitude. We should rebuild the cairn and head back, Zach said reluctantly, aware of the shortening winter day. Storm and Daisy will be getting restless. Together, they carefully reconstructed the stone marker, leaving the tin box and its contents secured in Olivia's saddlebag. As they worked, snow began to fall again, light flurries dancing on the wind. The ride back to Silver Creek was mostly silent, each lost in thought about what had transpired on the mountainside. By the time they reached town, twilight was settling over the valley, and lamplight glowed warmly in windows along the main street. Zach saw Olivia safely to her small house behind the bookshop, then took the horses to the livery. By the time he returned, she had built a fire in the hearth and set the kettle to boil for tea. I thought you might come back, she said as she opened the door to his knock. I wanted to thank you properly for today. No thanks needed, he replied, stepping inside and removing his hat. The warmth of her home enveloped him, dispelling the December chill. Finding those documents puts an end to the uncertainty you've lived with for 3 years. That's worth more than a simple thank you. Nevertheless, she took his coat and hung it beside her own. Tea. Please. As she busied herself with the preparations, Zach took in the modest but comfortable home she had created for herself. Bookshelves lined the walls, unsurprisingly in small touches. A colorful quilt, dried flowers in a vase, a painting of a distant shoreline, spoke of a woman who refused to surrender beauty even in the face of hardship. Your home suits you, he observed as she handed him a steaming cup. It's small, but it's mine. She settled beside him on the sofa, close enough that their shoulders touched. The first place that's truly been mine alone. Zach sensed there was more to that statement than simple property ownership. You weren't happy in your marriage, he asked carefully. I was, she clarified. James was a good man. Kind, brilliant in his way, but I married young, barely 18, and went straight from my father's house to my husband's. When James died, I had to learn who Olivia was apart from being someone's daughter or wife. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. It was terrifying and liberating. And now do you know who Olivia is? Her smile was gentle. I'm learning. She's stronger than I thought, more stubborn, capable of standing her ground even when afraid. She set down her cup and turned to face him fully. And she's discovered she's capable of feelings she thought had died with James, feelings for a drifter who decided to stay. The simple honesty of her declaration moved Zach deeply. Setting aside his own tea, he took her hands in his. I've spent 7 years believing the frontier was no place for putting down roots. That safety meant keeping everyone at arm's length. He shook his head, amazed at how thoroughly that belief had been upended. Then I met you, and in one night, everything I thought I knew was called into question. And now I understand that true safety isn't found in isolation. It's found in having someone to stand beside you when danger comes. He reached up to touch her face, tracing the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. I'm not good with fancy words, Olivia. But I know I want to be that someone for you, if you'll have me. Her answer was to lean forward and kiss him, a gesture that conveyed more than words could express. When they parted, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears and something that looked remarkably like joy. Is that a yes? Zach asked, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia laughed, the sound bright and clear in the quiet room. That is very definitely a yes, Zachariah Ingram. Spring came early to Silver Creek that year, as if nature itself approved of the changes taking place in the mountain town. The silver mine that had caused so much strife was now operating legally under the oversight of the Zimmerman Mining Trust, with profits funding improvements throughout the community. Olivia had expanded the bookshop to include a small lending library and classroom space where she taught reading to the children of miners and ranchers. The territorial governor himself had commended her for her contributions to education on the frontier. And Zach, still serving as deputy sheriff, had found a sense of belonging he had never thought possible. The restlessness that had driven him for 7 years had been replaced by a deeper purpose, protecting the town that had become home and the woman who had transformed his life. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers carpeting the mountainsides and the air fragrant with pine, Zachariah Ingram stood before the town's small church beside Samuel Porter. The sheriff, serving as best man, gave him an encouraging nod as music began playing inside the building. "Ready?" Porter asked quietly. Zach adjusted his string tie, a concession to formality he would make only for this occasion, and nodded. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." The church doors opened, and Olivia appeared on the arm of Caleb Wilson, who had happily agreed to give the bride away. Her dress was simple but elegant, ivory lace over silk that caught the sunlight streaming through the windows. Her chestnut hair was adorned with spring flowers, and her green eyes found Zach's immediately, sharing a private message of love that needed no words. As she joined him before the pastor, Zach took her hands in his. "You're beautiful," he whispered, "and you clean up nicely yourself, deputy," she replied with a smile that still made his heart race. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows exchanged before the entire town that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers. When the pastor finally pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the congregation seemed to shake the rafters. Later, at the celebration held in the town square, Zach found a moment alone with his bride. Drawing her away from the well-wishers, he led her to a quiet spot beneath a blossoming apple tree. "Happy Mrs. Ingram?" he asked, savoring the new name on his tongue. "Deliriously so, Mr. Ingram." She leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. "Though I believe the bookshop sign will need to read Ingram Books and Maps now." "I was thinking Ingram and Zimmerman," he suggested. "To honor both our journeys." Olivia's eyes softened. "I would like that." She looked out at the town, their town bustling with celebration. "Did you ever imagine when you rode into Silver Creek that day that this would be your life 7 months later?" Zach shook his head. "Not for a moment. I was certain I'd be halfway to Montana by the next sunrise." He tipped her face up to his. "Best detour I ever took." "And no regrets about settling down in one place?" "None," he assured her, meaning it completely. "Though I do have one condition about this settled life we're building." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "That we never stop exploring together. There are places I want to show you, trails worth riding just to see what's beyond the next ridge." Olivia's smile was radiant. "I would like nothing better than to see this country through your eyes. As long as we always have a home to return to." "Always," he promised, sealing the vow with a kiss as the celebration continued around them. In the years that followed, Zachariah and Olivia Ingram became pillars of the Silver Creek community. Their bookshop flourished, expanding to include a newspaper and printing press that connected the town to the wider world. The silver mine provided prosperity without the corruption that had tainted it under Crawford's influence. And on cool evenings, the couple could often be seen walking hand in hand along Silver Creek itself, two souls who had found in each other what the frontier so often denied: a place to belong, a love to sustain them, and the courage to believe in both. For Zach, who had once believed the frontier was no place for lasting connections, the truth had been revealed in a single night by a widow with secrets. The greatest safety wasn't found in isolation, but in the strength of two hearts facing life's challenges together, a lesson as enduring as the mountains that watched over their home.